In a bustling city where tensions between law enforcement and marginalized communities ran high, there lived a woman named Maya Carter. She was an ordinary-looking person to most people who passed her on the street, dressed in tailored blazers, carrying a sleek leather bag and always wearing a calm expression. But beneath this polished exterior lay a secret that very few people knew. Maya was not just another civilian. She worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, one of the most powerful agencies in the world. Her job required her to blend seamlessly into society while gathering intelligence on threats to national security. To everyone around her, she appeared to be a regular professional living her life, but in reality, she carried secrets that could shake nations. On a crisp autumn evening, Maya decided to unwind after a long day at work. She stopped by her favorite cafe, a cozy little spot tucked away on a busy street corner. The cafe was known for its rich coffee and buttery pastries, which she loved to bring home for her neighbors' kids. As she stood in line, waiting to place her order, Maya couldn't help but notice how alive the city felt. People bustled about, cars honked in the distance, and the air smelled faintly of roasted beans and fresh bread. It was a typical night in the city, and Maya felt grateful for the small moments of normalcy in her otherwise secretive life. After picking up her coffee and pastries, Maya stepped out onto the sidewalk. She adjusted her scarf against the cool breeze and began walking toward her apartment. The streets were crowded with pedestrians, families heading home, young professionals chatting animatedly, and street vendors calling out to passers-by. Everything seemed peaceful. But as Maya turned onto a quieter block, she noticed two police officers approaching her from the opposite direction. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police patrols were common in the area, especially during the evening hours. However, something about their demeanor caught her attention. They weren't casually scanning the crowd or exchanging pleasantries with locals. Instead, they moved with purpose, their eyes locked onto her. Maya instinctively slowed her pace, trying to appear nonchalant. She had been in situations like this before, moments when being a black woman in America made her a target for unnecessary scrutiny. Still, she reminded herself to stay calm. These encounters usually ended quickly, with nothing more than a few awkward questions or a dismissive wave. But tonight, things would take a different turn. The two officers stopped directly in front of her, blocking her path. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, asked gruffly, "What are you doing here?" His tone was accusatory, as if he already assumed she was up to no good. Maya blinked, taken aback by the sudden hostility. "I'm just heading home," she replied evenly, keeping her voice steady. She pointed down the street toward her building, which was only a few blocks away. The second officer, shorter but equally intimidating, crossed his arms and sneered. "Home? You sure about that? This is a nice neighborhood. Doesn't look like your kind of place." His words dripped with condescension, and Maya felt a familiar pang of frustration. She had heard remarks like this countless times before, subtle jabs meant to make her feel out of place. But this time, something inside her bristled. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her, not tonight. "I live here," Maya said firmly, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. Is there a problem?" Her confidence seemed to irritate them further. The taller officer stepped closer, invading her personal space. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he said, though his vague explanation sounded rehearsed. "Mind showing us some ID?" Maya hesitated for a split second. She knew her identification card wouldn't reveal anything unusual. It listed her name, address, and basic details, but she also understood the implications of handing it over. Once they saw her credentials, they might dig deeper, asking questions she couldn't answer without blowing her cover. Still, refusing to comply would only escalate the situation. With a deep breath, she reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet, retrieving her driver's license. As she handed it over, the shorter officer snatched it rudely, studying it with exaggerated skepticism. "Maya Carter, huh?" he muttered, glancing back at her. "You don't look like someone who lives around here?" His comment was laced with disdain, and Maya clenched her jaw to keep from snapping back. Instead, she focused on maintaining her composure. "I assure you I do," she said coolly. "Can I go now?" But the officers weren't done with her yet. The taller one gestured toward her bag, which she still held tightly in one hand. "What's in there?" he demanded. "Open it up." Maya froze. Inside her bag were documents related to her latest assignment, classified materials that could land anyone who mishandled them in serious trouble. Revealing even a glimpse of those papers could compromise her mission and put countless lives at risk. Yet refusing to comply would raise suspicions she couldn't afford. "I'd rather not," Maya replied, her voice firm but polite. "It's personal property." The officers exchanged a glance, clearly amused by her resistance. "Personal property?" The shorter one scoffed. "That's funny. See, we're the ones with badges and guns, lady. So unless you want to spend the night in cuffs, you'll do what we say." For a moment, Maya considered her options. She could try to reason with them further, hoping they'd back off, or she could assert herself, risking exposure in the process. Either way, the situation was spiraling out of control. As the tension mounted, Maya realized she had reached a crossroads. These officers had underestimated her, assuming she was just another civilian they could bully. What they didn't know was that they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. Unbeknownst to them, Maya had years of training under her belt. She knew how to de-escalate dangerous situations, how to read people's intentions, and most importantly, how to protect herself when cornered. And while she preferred to avoid conflict whenever possible, she also understood that sometimes standing your ground was necessary, not just for yourself, but for the greater good. Tonight, she decided, would be one of those times. With a mixture of resolve and caution, Maya prepared to take action. She glanced at the officers, noting their body language and positioning. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached into her bag, not to pull out the classified documents, but to retrieve her phone. "If you insist on searching my belongings," she said, her tone icy, "then I'll need to record this interaction. After all, transparency is important, isn't it?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. For the first time since the encounter began, the officers looked uneasy. Little did they know, their attempt to harass an innocent civilian was about to backfire spectacularly, and Maya was ready to ensure they paid the price for their arrogance. The moment Maya mentioned recording the interaction, the atmosphere shifted. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado faltering slightly. They weren't used to civilians challenging them, let alone someone who seemed so composed and unafraid. Still, they tried to regain control of the situation. "You can record all you want," the taller officer snapped, though his voice lacked its previous confidence. "But that doesn't change the fact that we're investigating suspicious activity. Now open your bag." Maya's mind raced as she weighed her next move. She knew showing resistance could escalate things further, but compliance might put her mission and potentially lives at risk. Her training kicked in, reminding her to stay calm under pressure. Slowly, she pulled out her phone and tapped the screen to activate the camera app. Without breaking eye contact with the officers, she held up the device and began recording. "For the record," she said clearly, ensuring her voice carried into the microphone, "I'm being stopped by 2 officers who claim I'm acting suspiciously. I've shown them my ID, which confirms I live in this neighborhood, yet they continue to harass me without cause." Her words hit a nerve. The shorter officer scowled, stepping closer to block the view of the phone. "Turn that thing off," he growled. "This is police business." But Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted the phone slightly to capture both officers in the frame. "Actually," she replied coolly, "this is public property, and I have every right to document what's happening. If you're conducting legitimate police work, then there's nothing to hide, correct?" The taller officer clenched his jaw, clearly irritated. He glanced around, noticing a small crowd beginning to form. Pedestrians had slowed down or stopped altogether, curious about the commotion. Some were whispering among themselves, while others openly stared at the confrontation unfolding before them. Maya noticed the growing audience too and used it to her advantage. She spoke louder now, addressing not just the officers but also the onlookers. "These officers are accusing me of loitering in my own neighborhood," she said, her tone steady, but tinged with frustration. They've demanded my ID and now want to search my personal belongings, all without probable cause. Does anyone else find that strange? Her question resonated with several people nearby. A middle-aged woman holding a grocery bag stepped forward, frowning at the officers. "What exactly is going on here?" she asked sharply. "She looks like she's just walking home." Another man chimed in, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, this seems unnecessary. Why are you bothering her?" The officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were losing control of the narrative. Despite the mounting pressure, the shorter officer refused to back down. "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, we'll have no choice but to take you in," he barked, trying to sound authoritative. But his threat fell flat when Maya simply raised an eyebrow. "Take me in for what?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Walking while black? Carrying coffee and pastries? Or is it because you don't believe someone like me belongs in this neighborhood?" Her pointed questions drew murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. Even some passers-by who hadn't initially stopped began lingering, drawn in by the drama. Realizing they needed to act quickly, the taller officer reached for Maya's bag. "Fine, if you won't show us voluntarily, we'll do it ourselves," he declared, attempting to grab it from her hands. But Maya was faster. In one fluid motion, she tightened her grip on the strap and took a step back, putting distance between herself and the officer. "Touch my bag again without my consent," she warned, her voice low but laced with steel, "and you'll regret it." The officer hesitated, caught off guard by her sudden assertiveness. For a split second, doubt flickered across his face. Was this really worth the trouble? But pride got the better of him. He lunged forward once more, determined to prove his authority. That's when Maya made her move. With swift precision, she swung the bag behind her back, keeping it out of reach, and pressed play on her phone. A pre-recorded message blared through the speaker. "Attention. This individual is a federal agent operating under direct orders from the Central Intelligence Agency. Any interference with their duties will result in immediate legal action." Silence fell over the scene. Both officers froze, their eyes widening in shock. The crowd reacted too, gasps rippling through the spectators as they processed what they'd just heard. Maya stood tall, her expression unreadable. She waited a beat before speaking again, her voice calm but commanding. "Now," she said, lowering the phone, "do you still think searching my bag is a good idea?" The officers exchanged panicked looks, unsure how to respond. Their initial assumption, that Maya was just another civilian they could intimidate, had crumbled completely. They had no idea how to handle someone with ties to the CIA, especially since her status likely meant she outranked them by several levels. The taller officer stammered, trying to salvage the situation. "We, didn't know." He trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. His partner wasn't faring any better, his face pale as he muttered something about a misunderstanding. Maya let the awkward silence stretch for a few moments longer, allowing the weight of the situation to sink in. Then, with deliberate slowness, she retrieved her ID from the taller officer's hand and slipped it back into her wallet. "Here's what's going to happen next," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're going to apologize for harassing me without cause. You're going to leave me alone and return to whatever patrol route you came from. And trust me, if I hear a single complaint about either of you pulling this kind of stunt again, I'll make sure the consequences are severe." The officers nodded hastily, eager to escape the spotlight. "We're sorry, ma'am," the shorter one mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "It was just routine questioning. No harm intended." Maya arched an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Routine questioning doesn't involve racial profiling or threats of arrest," she shot back. "Remember that." Moving forward, without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her head held high. As she disappeared into the crowd, the bystanders erupted into applause. Some cheered loudly, while others clapped quietly, grateful for witnessing such a powerful moment of resistance. Maya felt a surge of satisfaction but kept her emotions in check. She knew the battle wasn't over, not entirely. While she had managed to defuse the situation, the underlying issues of systemic racism and abuse of power remained. Still, tonight's encounter proved something important. Standing up for yourself could inspire others to do the same. Back at her apartment, Maya set her bag down on the kitchen counter and exhaled deeply. It had been a long night, and she needed a moment to decompress. As she poured herself a glass of water, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from her handler, asking for an update on her current assignment. Maya hesitated, staring at the screen. Part of her wanted to report the incident immediately, knowing it could lead to disciplinary action against the officers involved. But another part of her wondered if this was bigger than just two bad apples. It was about exposing a system that allowed such behavior to thrive. After a brief pause, Maya typed out a reply. Requesting permission to address recent events involving local law enforcement, she wrote. Details to follow. She hit send and leaned back against the counter, her mind already racing with possibilities. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message, a reminder that even those who seemed powerless could hold immense power when pushed too far. And as Maya sipped her water, she knew one thing for certain. Those officers would never forget the night they underestimated her. The next morning, Maya woke up with a sense of purpose. The events of the previous night were still fresh in her mind, and she knew she couldn't let them slide. While most people might have chosen to move on after such an encounter, perhaps filing a complaint or venting to friends, Maya wasn't like most people. Her training as a CIA operative had taught her the importance of strategy, precision, and timing. This wasn't just about getting justice for herself. It was about exposing systemic issues that affected countless others who didn't have the resources or a platform to fight back. Her first step was reviewing the footage she'd recorded during the confrontation. She connected her phone to her laptop and carefully watched the video, pausing at key moments to analyze the officers' behavior. Their aggressive tone, dismissive attitude, and attempts to intimidate her were all captured clearly. Even more damning was the growing crowd of bystanders who had witnessed their misconduct firsthand. Maya knew this evidence would be crucial, not only for holding the officers accountable but also for sparking broader conversations about police accountability and racial profiling. As she edited the footage, trimming unnecessary parts and adding timestamps for clarity, Maya thought about her next move. Filing a formal complaint was the obvious choice, but she wanted to go further. She decided to reach out to investigative journalists known for covering stories involving law enforcement misconduct. Over the years, she had built connections with several reporters through her work, and she trusted them to handle sensitive information responsibly. Before sending the video, however, she needed permission from her superiors. After all, revealing even a glimpse of her involvement with the CIA could jeopardize ongoing operations. Her handler responded within hours, granting her leeway to proceed. "You've earned the right to handle this situation as you see fit," the message read. "Just ensure nothing compromises national security." With headquarters' blessing, Maya felt a renewed sense of determination. She sent the edited footage to a trusted journalist named Rachel Monroe, along with a brief note explaining the context. "This is bigger than me," she wrote. "It's about exposing patterns of abuse and demanding accountability." Rachel wasted no time diving into the story. Known for her relentless pursuit of truth, she began digging deeper into the officers' backgrounds, uncovering a troubling history of complaints against them. Multiple individuals had accused them of harassment, excessive force, and discriminatory behavior, but none of those cases had led to meaningful consequences. Rachel compiled these findings into a comprehensive report, which included Maya's video as the centerpiece. When the article went live online later that week, it quickly gained traction, igniting outrage across social media platforms. Meanwhile, Maya took another bold step, attending a community forum hosted by local activists advocating for police reform. The event was held in a packed auditorium, with speakers sharing personal stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. Maya listened intently, her heart heavy with empathy as she heard tales of fear, frustration, and resilience. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped onto the stage, greeted by polite applause. Dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, she exuded confidence as she adjusted the microphone and began addressing the audience. "Good evening," she started, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Maya Carter, and I'm here today not just as a resident of this city but as someone who has experienced firsthand the dangers of unchecked power." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Last night, I was stopped by two officers who accused me of suspicious activity simply because of where I live and what I look like. They demanded my ID, tried to search my belongings without cause, and made derogatory comments about my presence in this neighborhood. But what they didn't know was that their actions weren't just wrong, they were reckless." The room fell silent as Maya recounted the details of the encounter, describing how the officers' aggression escalated until she revealed her affiliation with the CIA. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she explained the significance of her status and how it forced the officers to retreat. "Now some might say I got lucky," she continued, "but why should anyone need to rely on luck or privilege to avoid being mistreated? What happens to the countless others who don't have a federal badge to protect them?" Her speech struck a chord with the audience, many of whom nodded, vigorously in agreement. A young woman in the front row raised her hand timidly. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do we make sure this doesn't keep happening?" Maya smiled warmly, appreciating the sincerity of the question. "We start by speaking up," she replied, "by documenting every incident, reporting every injustice, and supporting each other when we stand our ground. Change won't happen overnight, but together, we can hold those in power accountable." Her words inspired a wave of action. Attendees left the forum energized, vowing to organize protests, file complaints, and share their own experiences publicly. For Maya, seeing this collective determination reinforced her belief in the power of unity. Still, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The officers involved would likely face internal investigations, but true reform required dismantling deeply ingrained systems of oppression, a task far greater than any one person could achieve alone. Back at home, Maya reflected on the day's events. She felt proud of what she had accomplished, yet humbled by the realization that her fight was part of something much larger. As she scrolled through news articles and social media posts highlighting her speech, she noticed a recurring theme: people calling her a hero. While she appreciated the sentiment, Maya didn't see herself that way. To her, she was simply doing her duty, not just as a CIA operative, but as a human being committed to justice. Her thoughts turned to the officers who had underestimated her. She wondered if they understood the magnitude of their mistake. By targeting her, they had inadvertently shone a spotlight on the very issues they sought to ignore. And while Maya had no desire for revenge, she hoped they learned a valuable lesson. Never judge a book by its cover. Because sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths, and when provoked, they can shake entire systems to their core. The fallout from Maya's confrontation with the officers spread like wildfire. Within days, the story dominated headlines, social media feeds, and conversations in homes, workplaces, and community centers across the city. The investigative article, written by Rachel Monroe, became a viral sensation, drawing attention not only to Maya's personal experience, but also to the broader issue of systemic misconduct within law enforcement. People were outraged, not just because of what had happened to Maya, but because her case was emblematic of countless others that had gone unreported or ignored. At the police precinct where the two officers worked, panic set in almost immediately. Their superior, Captain Harass, called an emergency meeting as soon as news of the incident broke. The room buzzed with tension as officers filed in, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats while others exchanged nervous glances. Captain Harass stood at the front, his face grim. He held up a printout of the article and slammed it onto the table. "Do any of you know how much trouble we're in?" he barked, his voice echoing through the room. This isn't just about two bad decisions. It's about the entire department being dragged through the mud. The officers involved, Officer Jenkins and Officer Morales, sat near the back, their heads bowed in shame. They knew they were in deep trouble, and there was no way to deny their involvement. The video evidence was undeniable, capturing every word, gesture, and facial expression. Worse still, the public outrage showed no signs of dying down. Protesters had gathered outside the precinct, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya," and "End police brutality now." News vans lined the streets, reporters eager to capture footage of the growing demonstration. It was clear that this wasn't just a local scandal, it was a national reckoning. Captain Harris turned his attention directly to Jenkins and Morales. "You two," he said, pointing a finger at them, "are going to explain yourselves right now, and trust me, whatever you say better be convincing." Jenkins, the taller of the two, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, it was just routine questioning," he stammered. "We didn't mean for things to escalate. We thought she was suspicious." "Suspicious?" Captain Harris interrupted, his voice rising. "She was walking home with coffee and pastries. What part of that screamed criminal activity to you? Or was it her skin color that made her suspicious?" His words hung heavy in the air, silencing the room. Jenkins and Morales exchanged uneasy looks, unable to respond. They knew they couldn't justify their actions without sounding racist, and admitting that would only make matters worse. Meanwhile, Maya continued to navigate the aftermath of the incident. While she appreciated the support pouring in from strangers and allies alike, she remained focused on ensuring accountability. She met with Rachel Monroe several times to discuss next steps, emphasizing the importance of using her story as a catalyst for change rather than a one-off victory. "This isn't about me getting revenge," Maya explained. "It's about creating lasting reform so no one else has to go through what I did, or worse." Rachel nodded, scribbling notes furiously. "I agree," she said, "but we need to keep the pressure on. Public attention is powerful, but it fades quickly unless we channel it into action." Together, they brainstormed ideas for keeping the momentum alive. One suggestion was organizing a series of town hall meetings where residents could voice their concerns directly to city officials and law enforcement leaders. Another idea was pushing for policy changes, such as mandatory body cameras for all officers and stricter consequences for misconduct. Maya also reached out to civil rights organizations, offering her testimony and expertise to bolster their efforts. Her unique position as both a victim of police harassment and a federal agent gave her credibility and influence that few others possessed. Activists welcomed her input, seeing her as a bridge between marginalized communities and institutions of power. At one meeting with a prominent advocacy group, Maya spoke passionately about the need for transparency and accountability. "We can't solve problems we refuse to acknowledge," she said. "And too often, these issues are swept under the rug because they're uncomfortable to confront. But silence only perpetuates injustice." Her words resonated deeply with those in attendance, many of whom shared their own harrowing experiences with law enforcement. A young man recounted being pulled over multiple times for no reason other than driving a nice car. An elderly woman described being frisked in front of her grandchildren during a routine traffic stop. Each story added weight to the argument that reform wasn't just necessary, it was urgent. Back at the precinct, internal investigations into Jenkins and Morales began swiftly. Their colleagues avoided them, fearing guilt by association. Both men were placed on administrative leave, pending disciplinary action, though rumors swirled that they might face criminal charges depending on the outcome of the probe. Meanwhile, Captain Harris scrambled to salvage the department's reputation. He issued a public apology, promising sweeping reforms and increased training for officers on racial sensitivity and de-escalation tactics. However, skeptics dismissed his statements as empty promises, arguing that similar pledges had been made after previous scandals, only for nothing to change. Despite the challenges, progress started to emerge. City council members introduced legislation aimed at increasing oversight of law enforcement agencies. Community leaders collaborated with activists to draft proposals for independent review boards that would investigate complaints against police officers. Even some rank-and-file officers expressed support for reform, acknowledging that meaningful change was long overdue. For Maya, watching these developments unfold filled her with cautious optimism. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but she found solace in knowing she had sparked something bigger than herself. Her courage had inspired others to speak out, and her determination had forced those in power to take notice. Still, she reminded herself not to grow complacent. True justice required sustained effort, and she vowed to remain vigilant until tangible improvements were achieved. One evening, as Maya sat on her balcony sipping tea, she reflected on everything that had transpired. The confrontation with the officers had been unexpected, but it had ultimately served a greater purpose. By standing her ground, she had exposed cracks in a broken system and given hope to those who felt powerless. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Maya allowed herself a small smile. Change was never easy, but it was possible. And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to fight for what was right. Weeks turned into months, and the ripple effects of Maya's confrontation with the officers continued to reshape the city. The internal investigation at the police precinct concluded with Jenkins and Morales facing severe consequences. Both were stripped of their badges and terminated from the force, a rare outcome for cases involving misconduct. Additionally, the district attorney announced plans to pursue criminal charges against them for abuse of power and racial profiling. While some critics argued that these measures weren't enough to address systemic issues, others saw it as a significant step toward accountability, a clear message that no one was above the law. For Captain Harass, the fallout was equally profound. Under mounting pressure from city officials and the public, he implemented sweeping reforms within the department. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, and footage was required to be uploaded to a secure server accessible by independent oversight committees. Training programs on implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, and de-escalation tactics were expanded, with attendance tied directly to job performance evaluations. These changes didn't happen overnight, but they marked a turning point in how law enforcement operated in the city. Beyond the precinct, the movement sparked by Maya's actions gained momentum. Community forums transformed into organized coalitions advocating for policy changes at the state level. Activists drafted legislation calling for stricter guidelines on stops, searches, and arrests, ensuring that officers could only act based on probable cause rather than assumptions or stereotypes. Lawmakers, eager to respond to public demand, began holding hearings to discuss these proposals. Some resisted, arguing that such measures would hinder police effectiveness, but the majority recognized the urgent need for reform. Maya played an instrumental role in this process, using her platform to amplify marginalized voices. She attended legislative sessions testifying alongside victims of police brutality and civil rights advocates. Her presence carried weight, not just because of her CIA credentials, but because she had lived through the very injustices they sought to combat. During one particularly impactful hearing, she addressed the committee with unwavering conviction. "Every person deserves to feel safe in their own community," she said, her voice resonating throughout the chamber. But for too many, interactions with law enforcement are sources of fear instead of protection. We can't fix what we refuse to confront. Let today be the day we choose action over apathy. Her words struck a chord, earning applause from spectators and prompting lawmakers to take the proposed reforms seriously. By the end of the session, several key provisions, including mandatory body cameras, civilian review boards, and penalties for failing to report misconduct, were approved for implementation. It was a hard-fought victory, and while not everyone was satisfied, it represented meaningful progress. In the broader community, Maya's story inspired countless individuals to speak out about their own experiences. Social media campaigns encouraged people to share videos and testimonies of encounters with law enforcement, creating a digital archive of evidence that activists could use to push for further change. Local schools incorporated discussions about systemic racism and civic responsibility into their curriculums, teaching students the importance of standing up for justice. Even businesses joined the effort, pledging funds to support grassroots organizations working toward equity and reform. Despite the positive developments, Maya remained grounded. She understood that true transformation required patience, persistence, and vigilance. One evening, as she sat in her living room reviewing updates on the latest policy changes, her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel Monroe. "Just wanted to say thank you," the message read. "Your bravery has changed so much for me, for the city, for everyone fighting for justice." Maya smiled softly, appreciating the sentiment but knowing full well that the work was far from over. The following week, Maya attended another community event, this time focused on celebrating recent victories while strategizing for future battles. The atmosphere was electric, filled with hope and determination. Speakers took turns highlighting milestones achieved since Maya's initial confrontation, crediting her courage as the spark that ignited widespread activism. When it was her turn to speak, Maya stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. She raised a hand to quiet the crowd before addressing them. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice warm yet resolute. "But let's be clear, none of this happened because of me alone. It happened because each of you chose to stand together, to demand better, and to believe in the possibility of change. Yes, we've made strides, but our fight is far from finished. There will always be those who resist progress, who cling to outdated systems and ideologies. But as long as we remain united, there's nothing we can't overcome." Her speech ended with a standing ovation, tears streaming down the faces of many attendees. For Maya, the moment reinforced why she had chosen this path, to fight injustice wherever it lurked. Though her identity as a CIA operative remained largely unknown to the public, whispers of "the woman who stood up to corrupt cops" spread widely, turning her into a symbol of resilience and empowerment. As weeks passed, life in the city slowly began to shift. Residents reported feeling safer during routine interactions with law enforcement, thanks to increased transparency and accountability measures. Officers, too, seemed more mindful of their behavior, aware that any misstep could lead to serious repercussions. Of course, challenges persisted. Some departments resisted implementing reforms and isolated incidents of misconduct still occurred, but the overall trajectory pointed toward improvement. For Maya personally, the experience deepened her commitment to her work. She returned to her duties at the CIA with renewed focus, channeling her energy into missions aimed at dismantling corruption and protecting vulnerable populations. Yet she never forgot the lessons she had learned during those tumultuous months. Standing up to Jenkins and Morales had taught her that even the smallest acts of resistance could ignite powerful movements, and that underestimating anyone often came with grave consequences. One crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after the incident, Maya found herself back at the cafe where it all began. She ordered her usual coffee and pastries, taking a moment to savor the aroma before stepping outside. As she walked down the familiar streets, she noticed subtle changes: the absence of hostile stares, the friendlier nods from neighbors, the sense of solidarity among strangers. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for Maya, that was enough. In the end, what started as a single act of defiance had grown into something far greater, a testament to the power of courage, unity, and perseverance. The officer's big mistake had indeed proven to be a catalyst for change, a reminder that when pushed too far, even the quietest voices could roar loud enough to shake entire systems. And as Maya disappeared into the crowd, blending seamlessly, once again she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes justice begins with simply saying, "Enough is enough."